Okay, everybody. So today we're going to be doing a tutorial in Maya, and we're going to be doing it for our architectural asset. It's a modular architectural asset. Now, the reason architectural assets are very important in video games is because they are essentially what any game designer will use to create the actual level. And the idea is to make modular objects which are adaptable and can be used. Um, they have a lot of versatility that can be used to create different levels within a game engine. And as artists, we have to make sure that our objects are truly modular and that they would work in a game engine so that when they get handed off to a game developer, model or a level builder, they can they don't have to worry about the pieces working correctly. They just work. They snap to a grid. They snap together. There's no overlapping, and the art looks good. So let's go ahead and get started. So for this project, I would like you to find an object which you can create, which would be symmetrical on both sides. So it doesn't necessarily have to, but it's a good practice. So in this case, I think this is the one I think I might try to do. Uncharted series is one of my favorite series, so you can see that this piece right here is completely symmetrical. It's got a lot of stuff going on in it, so it's pretty cool looking. And you can see right here they actually, what a level designer did is duplicated these pieces for the arches, right? And they're similar, but they add a lot of extra assets to break up the building and make it less perfectly symmetrical. And even on this, you can see right here that there's some vines growing up on the side and right here that make this seem less like it's mirrored and more symmetrical, which is really cool. And symmetrical assets also help you save a lot of texture space because you only have to texture half of your object, and then you duplicate that half, flip it over, and you essentially get twice the texture for your money, which is cool. Here's another scene with a lot of modular objects, and you can see these arches right here have been duplicated many times, and same with these windows. These are all modular assets which have been used to create this scene. Got a few more for you. Another perfect example of modular objects. This is probably, we got this pillar with all of its goodies, this window, and it looks like this window is slightly different, but they probably just used a little bit of a color shift, changed the content of what's inside the window. All this stuff up here has been repeated, so that's a perfect example of modular design. Here's another good one. You can see that these posts holding out this roofed area can easily be duplicated 4 times, and a player is not going to notice that it's the same object duplicated if a designer moves it and rotates it. Same with up here, you can see these posts are all modular. They're all sharing the same texture if you look close enough. But when you play a game like Uncharted, the quality is so good and the level design is so good that you don't spend enough time looking at the assets like this to notice that they are the same. So the illusion is great enough to where you just run right past it and you don't notice that kind of stuff. And that's evidence of a really good art team. And here's another scene that's got a lot going on in it. You can see that obviously there's a lot of modularity. The windows up here, these pillars, all of this right here. But there's also a lot of single objects. You see this wall face is cut up and damaged, and there's a lot of rubble and debris floating around. I guarantee you this wall asset was used somewhere else in the level, but just not within the view of this area right here. It's maybe down here or something like that, because generally we don't use a texture or an object once and let it be. We usually use it a lot. But we definitely take a lot of time and care into thinking about what would a player notice if they're going through here. Alright, so I think I'm going to choose this one as my example, and I'm gonna create this face of this wall with these pillars, maybe this one up here. Yeah, I think that'll look pretty good. So when we get started, we're gonna open Maya, and hopefully you guys aren't having as much trouble as I was having on Wednesday with Maya 2015 and its rendering problems. Excuse me, just drinking a little bit of coffee. Generally, you don't see Maya behaving that way. It's very odd to see it crash every 5 minutes. I suspect it was something to do with the hardware at school. Alright. So, when we are designing, or when we're creating objects for a video game, what we like to do is build them on a grid so that they are modular and they can be snapped to a grid in a video game engine. And we want to make sure that the scale is consistent. So when you first start Maya, you will be presented a grid. And the hard thing to know is, what is this grid scale? It's kind of arbitrary. You don't really know. It doesn't tell you anywhere in the main editor. So we have to check that on our own. So if you come up to Window, and you come up to Settings and Preferences, and you come over down to Preferences, be given this Preferences window. And there's a lot of stuff here, and if you're having trouble with Maya and maybe there's a rendering problem, there's a few settings that you can go through here to kind of suss things out. But for right now, what we want to do is come under the Settings panel, or tab, or whatever. And we're going to come over here, and we see in working units, it's set automatically to centimeters. And I believe this is how Maya comes prepackaged, and no matter where you are. So it'll probably be set to centimeters when you start. So we're going to change this from centimeters to meters, because we're going to be working on an architectural asset, which is huge, bigger than a human player. And instead of working on a scale where everything's, so when Maya is working in centimeters, it'll change how a bevel works. If you make a centimeter bevel on a huge object, it's going to be, it's not as good. So, and this will help our scale. We'll have the new grid up, which will help us scale our object correctly. So everything else is going to be okay. So we're going to hit save, and you'll see that you'll have to zoom out. First thing I want to do is create a human kind of dummy. Not a dummy, but kind of a scale that we know is the size of a human, and that way it'll give our object kind of a relative scale. And it's a little bit easier to eyeball things. So I'm going to come under the channel box, and I'm going to hit my cube. And I know, like, your average hero character in a video game, right? Is normally the 6 foot tall, good looking dude, right? So I'm going to come under height, and I know I'm working in meters, so these are each a meter, and let's say 3 meters, right? Is that 6 feet? No. 3 meters? Yeah. No, that's 9 feet, isn't it? Yes, yes it is. 2 meters tall. So when we're scaling our object, sometimes it's a good idea to bring in like a human mesh. There's plenty of places online where you can find like a base mesh in for any program. Sometimes it's kind of cool to have a character with a head and arms and all that stuff, but for now I'm just going to use this box to represent the size of my person. So I just looked it up. 6 feet in meters is 1.8. Yeah. Don't want to make this asset too tall. Stupid America working in Old English scale. I'll have to change that one day. Anyways, I'm going to bring this in so it kind of represents more of a human scale. Alright, so this is my human. I know that this is as tall as a person would be. Oh, and you're going to see a problem when you're working in meters. What happens is if you zoom out too far, the camera will decide not to render something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to this button over here on the left. It's this one with the menu. That one will give you the parameters for the camera, which we can control. And there is a near clip plane, which is actually kind of cool to play with sometimes if you're working on something really close and it's starting to become invisible. Let me show you what I mean. If I click on this and I set this to something like to 1, you might see something like this from time to time where it'll just stop rendering it. So all you have to do is come under the camera parameters and change this to a smaller number, 001. And so that we keep rendering our scene from far away, I'm going to add a couple zeros. And I can see, even with being really far away, it'll still try and render it. And generally that'll help try and get rid of some of the flickering as well. Alright, so we have our human scale, we have a reference. What I'm looking at here is probably something that's, I don't know, 20 feet tall. If I grab my little conversion, say 20 feet in meters, thanks Google, that's 6.96, I'm just going to round it. So my face, the face of my building is mostly square, so I'm going to start out with a square. I'm going to open my channel box. I'm going to make this 20 even. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 20. Dummy. 6. What I'm going to try and do is get the bottom to align as close as I can to the grid. It's pretty close. And to get it exact, what you can do is grab all the vertices on the bottom, hold down the X, and use the yellow Y-axis move, and that'll pop it to the actual grid. I'm going to do that. So it's not exactly 20 feet tall, but it's pretty close. And what you really want is the bottom to align with this plane, 0Y. And that's so that when we bring this into a game engine, we know it's going to touch the ground. And sometimes what I'll even do is I'll extend it past the ground a little bit so that it intersects with the ground in a game engine, and that way you know for certain that you're not going to get any weird shadows from our light bleeding from this object. So anyways, I'm going to grab my human scale. So what I'm going to do is select everything and then deselect my big object, and then I know my human scale's there. Alright, so let's look at our picture again. So it's kind of like an elongated shape. Yeah, that works for me. So this is going to be 4 meters wide. You can see because it's 4 meters wide. And I'm going to grab the face and I'm going to go into my move tool and I'm going to hold down the X button again so that I snap it exactly to this plane or this unit. Hold down X, snap. I know it didn't look like it moved much, but it's mathematically perfect on that edge right now. So as close as possible. So right now what we're seeing is 3 dimensions on this object, and I think that's going to be okay for these pillars, but for the face of the wall I don't necessarily need all 6 sides of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these faces, everything but the first one, and delete them. And now I'm going to grab my object and I'm going to go up into modify up on the left and center pivot, and that's going to move my manipulator into the center of my object. And now I can grab X again and then snap this right on the middle. Cool. And if I really wanted to make this 6 meters tall, I can make sure to snap that too. Alright. So, now we have the basic scale of our huge wall. And the next thing to do would be to break this up into pieces to kind of consider what kind of detail we want to put into this wall. So right now it's just a really, really super boring wall. But I kind of want some more of these features, especially the pillars, and I kind of like this thing going up here, and definitely the molding. I don't know if you call it molding, but this portion right here. And you can see that this is the same as this up here, most likely. So it'd be cool to make this as well. So let's go ahead and start building those pillars. So I'm going to make a new box, scale it up, and let's see. Should I do it right there? Might as well. It might not end up being as tall as the one in the image, but it'll look kind of similar and it'll be different enough to where I can say it's not the same. So the problem here is that if I want this box to be in the middle of these two lines, I can't actually snap it. If I hold down the X, it's going to snap exactly to the line. And in this case, what you could do is just build it halfway up this plane, but I want to maximize my texture space, so I want to make sure that this pillar starts at the very end of this face. So how do you do that? Well, there's a couple ways to do it. What you could do is just go into your grid and change this. I guess I could show you that real quick. I wouldn't recommend this way because it takes a little bit longer. Actually, no, I'm probably not even going to show you that way just because it's a little bit too involved. So what I'm going to do is hit the insert key on the keyboard, and you can see that it actually changed the manipulator if you're selected on an object. So what this does is when you hit insert, it actually allows you to move the manipulator wherever you want it. So let's see, I put it right there and I hit insert again. You can see now the move tool, rotate, and the scale are all placed on wherever I move that. So I'm going to hit insert again, and instead of moving it over here, I know this is a foot wide or a meter wide. I'm going to hold down the V key, which is going to vert snap. I'm going to throw it right on the vert of this box, the inner vert. I guess it doesn't really matter which one. I'm going to hit insert again. I'm going to hold down the X key and just going to snap it. Now, I know it's already aligned centered, but it's definitely not aligned on the bottom. So I'm going to hold X again and snap it up and there. So now we could just grab this face and snap it up by holding X. There we go. We're starting to get our object. I'm going to move my human scale a little bit over because I'm starting to get a better idea about how big this is. So what I could do really quickly is just duplicate this object so I have a copy on the other side, just holding down Control and D. And I'm going to move it to the side, hold down X, snap it, and there we go. So I'm going to make sure my render viewport 2.0 is on, and I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion so I can see a little bit more detail. And I think I want to also, no, I'll wait to add a light just in case. Alright, so we're starting to get the idea of how big our object is, and when we're looking at this on the side, it looks like we can maybe make this a little taller, but I think I'm going to keep it, yeah, I'll keep it as it is right now. Pretty good scale. If you think about a person, this is probably 2 floors tall, so I think that's fine. Alright, so when I duplicated this object over here, I didn't anticipate to have to keep this pillar, because what I'm going to do is actually end up duplicating this one after we've done all the work to it and then moving it over here. And that way we can we don't have to worry about the texture space. So I put this over here right now just to kind of check it out in the scale. So next, let's start considering the molding. Interesting. So it looks like they're actually using modular assets within this single piece. You can see that they're halfway up this huge face. There is kind of like a pillar cap, like a Roman style cap right there, and then it's right there. So it looks like to me that this was probably done in the while it was created in Maya or 3ds Max or whatever they used, and not in the game engine. So we're going to consider doing that, but what I might end up doing is scaling these faces down a little bit. I think my pillars are a little bit fat. Actually, I kind of like how they look. Yeah. Yeah, we'll leave them as is. So the next thing I'm going to do is create... Oh, you know what? Let's start splitting this up. So when I'm looking at this object, I see that there is a hole in the middle, and then there's an arch right here. Now, I can almost guarantee you that they didn't bother cutting in a hole for this arch right here. So the only hole that we have to worry about cutting into our object is this circle one right here. So there's a couple ways to do this. One of the easiest ways is to create a new cylinder. And I'm going to hold J and I'm going to rotate this so it snaps perfectly to 90. And I'm just going to eyeball where I think it would go. Kind of something like that, right? So, so one of the easiest ways to do this would be to use a Boolean, and this is a tool which I don't use really often, but it's actually very useful when putting holes in things. So, the way a Boolean works is it subtracts geometry from other geometry. So let me show you what I mean. So when working with a Boolean, first thing you want to grab is the thing that you want to remain, whatever you want to be cut into. So that in that case, that would be our wall right here. So I'm going to hold down Shift and then Shift collect my cylinder. And now the cylinder is going to be the child. So the face is the parent, and then this is the child. If I come up to Mesh, oh yeah, that's right, they probably moved it. Edit Mesh. I have a new belt, so I'll have to check that in a minute. Sorry guys. Oh, here we go. It's under Mesh and Booleans. So in this case, there's union, difference, and intersection. So what intersection would do is essentially get rid of all the geometry that's literally intersecting. I believe it would keep both objects. I don't use that one very often, and we're not going to use it in this case. Union would be literally to join the two as one piece. That's also something that we don't want because we want a hole, we don't want a cylinder sticking out. But difference is going to take our parent and subtract the child. So if I just click that real quick, you'll see that it generated a nice hole for me. Now, before I do that, actually, I already did it, so let me tell you why I'm going to undo real quick. I have many verts. And when you're thinking about human scale, you're looking at this, do I really need that many verts to define this hole in a video game? Probably not. I'm going to say no for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to undo. I'm going to select my cylinder, and I'm going to pick a new subdivision axis. So this changes how many faces make up the cylinder itself. And generally, I like to work in powers of 2, and that helps later if you want to increase the number of faces. It's a little bit easier if it's like a nice even number. So if I'm looking at this, 12 looks pretty good, and it's pretty simple, so I'm going to keep it at 12. So I'm going to select the parent, the face, and and the child, which is our cylinder, mesh, Boolean, difference. Alright, and now you can see it's starting to look a little bit better. The problem is we have some wonky edges, so what happens in this case is it tried to figure out how this piece of geometry would fit on this face and try and generate edges so that it would create proper geometry, and it failed miserably. So what we have to do is go in and make our own. So let me see if I can delete these without crashing Maya. Oh, very nice. Alright. So what I want to do is actually cut this whole thing in half. And that's something we might have done before we did the Boolean, but because I didn't, I'm going to go ahead and do it now. Yes, very weird stuff going on. I'm going to use my mesh tools, split. Oh yeah, they totally got rid of the split polygon tool, my old favorite tool. Okay, it doesn't seem to like this so far. So we'll save ourselves the trouble of having to manipulate weird geometry by having this first. So what I can do is go into the insert edge loop tool, and I'm just going to click and drag. Oops, I still have 2 selected. I want relative distance to edge. And I'm going to grab it. It's sort of close to the middle, but what I can do is grab the edge, hold down the X key, and snap it in the middle. So the next thing I could do is just go ahead and delete that face, because what we really only want is half of it. So now we can go under, we'll select our parent and our child, and we'll see if the Boolean tool has some new features now. They used to be really bad about creating intersections. Let's see, about creating edges, intersection calcification. Oh, I see. That's interesting. So what it would do is it could actually concave your object, or it'll cut through it. That didn't used to be there, which is nice. So in this case, I still only want the normal. So I'm going to hit apply, and there, it didn't give us any weird edges that time. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Oops, maximize. Now the next thing I want to do is probably add an edge loop across, because of course it won't let me. So I'm going to use the multi-cut tool, see if that'll work. Alright, and don't worry about it being the cleanest edge. What you can do is grab the vertices and grab the scale tool, and if you use the y-axis, it'll try and scale it down, and eventually if you pull this down enough, it'll create a nice flat line. So again, if you have like a really crooked line and you want to make it straight, all you have to do is select the 2 verts that you want straight, and then use the scale tool, drag the Y, or whatever scale you're working in, drag it down until it's flat. If you go too far, it'll reverse, but in this case it doesn't seem to. So the next thing we want to do is break up these verts so that we have proper geometry, because right now we have a crazy n-gon working right now. So I'm going to go into the multi-cut tool and start, whoops, that is not what I grabbed. I grabbed something else. Multi-cut tool. There we go. So I'm going to start breaking this up. Now, in this case, this is one of the times that we're going to have quite a few triangles, and that's perfectly okay. So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a vert, and I'm basically making edges to each one of these so that we have correct geometry, essentially. You can see that one of mine didn't actually work, so that's weird. I'm going to hold down that vert, hold down the V key, snap it up to this one because I know that's the circle, grab both of those and then hit my merge vertex tool, and there, now it's one vertex. So what I just did is I created a hole in this object and then created some really crappy geometry, and then what I did is create edges to these verts that were just free floating so that we have proper geometry. You can see now that this face has 4 sides, this one has 3, this one has 3, this one has 4, 3, 4. So that's working for right now. If we want to clean it up later, we definitely can, but this works for our purpose. So excuse me. So what you can see now is the manipulator is kind of in the middle of this object. I'm not sure when it snapped, but I'm going to move it straight to the center of our grid, which is our origin point. So if I hit that and hold down the V key, I'll bring it down right there. And hit enter again. What I can do is hit the D key, and what that did is duplicated my object in place. And if you come into your outliner, you'll see that there's now 2 cubes, and that's each one of our duplicated objects. I'm going to hit the newest one, cube 6, come under scale Z, which is this direction. And what I'm going to do is change this 1 to a -1. And what that does is duplicates my object based on where the locator is. In this case, since it's right over the origin, it'll just duplicate it right over there. And you can see that this is this object is black, and that's because we haven't set up the UVs yet, and that's okay for now. This is just kind of the proof point that we have a nice hole looking in this wall, and it's because we duplicated this one face over. So now what that means is that we could use this texture and optimize this texture space, just duplicate the face over here, and then we don't have to worry about extra textures over here. It's just mirroring the one that's on this side. Alright, so I'm going to actually come under edit UVs, or actually create UVs, automatic mapping, and I'm going to come up to normals, and I'm going to reverse my normals. Let's try that again. Normals, try set to face, no, normals. What I'm trying to do is change this from being all black to being back to the gray, and I believe that's a normals problem. Interesting. Let's see if we grab our stock material and place it back on the object. No? Okay, well, we'll suss that out later. We'll just deal with it for now. Alright. So the next object that we'd want to create probably would be this archway? Yeah, we'll do that. So when you look at an arch, it's pretty easy to break this up into like a primitive, which is our shapes up here. The way I look at it is that this is a circle that's been stretched and flattened out on the bottom. Pretty simple. So if I come under my primitives tool and I create a new polygon cylinder, I'm going to hold down the J key and flip this around. And because this is kind of a bigger object, I think I might bump this up from 12 to, I'll move it up to 16. Drag it up. And I'm going to get the scale pretty close to what it is in the image. That's pretty close. And what I think I'm going to do is just grab all the bottom faces, and I'm going to delete them. I'm going to zoom around, make sure I got all of them. Oh, I missed a couple. So we'll get rid of those. So, we have the top part of our arch. Now, all we have to do is grab the edges on the bottom. I double clicked on the bottom and grab the whole edge loop and extrude edge. I'm going to grab the extrude edge tool and then hit this little 1-0 button, the on off, and what that does is switches it to global extrude rather than local. Local is trying to extrude the edge based on this normal face, or this face angle right here, so it would have dragged it out. But we want it straight down, so I hit that, pull it straight down. There we go. We're starting to get our arch object. So I kind of want to work on this by itself for a second. I'm going to hit the isolate select tool, and I'm going to pull this in a little bit, and that's looking alright. The next thing we want to do is close this face on the bottom, because we don't want just a hole in our object. So what I think I'm going to do is double select all the edges on the bottom. If you come up to mesh tools, once again, I don't know where they moved it. Let's see. What I'm looking for is the fill hole tool. If you happen to see it before me, you are awesome. Mesh, fill hole. There it is. So what that does is it just creates a piece of geometry to cover the whole edge loop that we selected. But it didn't put an edge in between the middle, which we need. So all I have to do is come under the multi-cut tool, create my edge, and hit enter. Cool. So now we're starting to get the arch. That's looking pretty cool. Something that you'll notice in the image is that it's actually indented, and it looks pretty cool like that, so we're going to try and simulate that as well. Now, there'd be a couple different ways to do this. I think the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to scale it in, actually, smaller than what I think it should be. And I'm going to grab all the faces on the perimeter. And I can do that the same way I grab edge loops. Just click on one and double click, and it'll swoop around. And now I'm going to go to extrude face. So essentially what I just tried to do is create an extrusion on the inside or the outside so that we can extrude the inner geometry in. You could have done this another way as well. Rather than scaling the whole thing and extruding on the outside, you could have just grabbed all the faces on the inside and extrude those in. I'm going to grab the global one, pull it in, scale it up a little bit. So that would be the easier way, I guess, to do that. And then I'm going to do it again with the inside. Extrude face. And now I'm going to pull it back. Let me grab the right angle. Now I pull it back. Scale this one up a little bit. And cool, it's starting to look alright. You'll notice that the angles in here are very soft, and what you can do to fix that, and what I mean by that is that the normals, which are the angles of these faces, are all calculated in a soft manner. So if I grab this edge loop of edges that go all the way around, and I want this edge to be rendered very sharply, all I have to do is up in normals. You see the harden edge tool, or the harden edge button, click on that with your edges selected, and you'll see the difference is that it renders this now as an intersecting angle, and the light is very crisp. In this case, it looks much better that way. I'm going to do this outside one as well. I'm going to hit the G key to repeat my last step. And there, that looks a bit more realistic. And then maybe these two edges down here as well. Yeah, that's starting to look good. Cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to File, and I'm going to save my scene as. Find my local directory. Oops, not capture. We're in classwork now. Wall 1. I'm going to hit save. Alright, so we're going to take a little break and come back, and we're going to finish up the geometry on this one.